Lando Norris is the 2025 Formula One World Champion. He wrapped up the title in Abu Dhabi, and although it wasn't one of the most exciting title deciders that we have seen over the past couple of decades, it was still exactly what he needed to. He finished on the podium and in the end wrapped up the championship by just 2 points ahead of Max Verstappen, who has actually won 3 races in 3 weeks to close out the championship, but it wasn't quite enough compared to Lando, who held on to his points advantage and once again won the championship by just 2 points. And now, in terms of the race itself, there wasn't really that much drama for the most part. There was a few kind of interesting moments during the race, for example, Piastri overtaking Norris on lap 1, especially on the harder tyres. I thought that was a really impressive move, and obviously it was vital for Piastri if he had any hopes of winning the title, but again, he needed a lot of things to go his way. And I found it very interesting because it was a clear sign, in my opinion, of a little bit of nerves from Lando, which is totally understandable for someone going for their first championship in a title decider. In fact, if you go back to 2014, Nico Rosberg got jumped at the line by Lewis Hamilton at the beginning of the race. If you go back to 2021, Max Verstappen got jumped by Lewis Hamilton right at the beginning, once again when he was going for his first world title, and that is exactly what we saw on lap 1 when Lando got jumped by Oscar at the end of the back straight. The only 2 moments of jeopardy during the race was firstly with Charles Leclerc, who was very impressive on the opening stint that Ferrari was a lot better in the race, especially if you look at how bad it was on the Friday. But even though Leclerc kind of put Lando under a little bit of pressure, and again there was a little bit of jeopardy because had Leclerc overtook Lando and had Max won the race, then Lando wouldn't have been world champion and Max would have been in the prime position to win the title. However, again, although the Ferrari improved, it was still nowhere near compared to the McLaren, and to be honest, Leclerc wasn't even that close at any point to really trouble Lando. And then of course we saw that incident between Lando and also Yuki. Now, this is not the first time that we have seen weaving on that exact straight. That is exactly what Max Verstappen did in 2021 when he overtook Lewis, but on that occasion Max did not incur a penalty. And to be honest, I actually think Lando kind of got away with one because even though Yuki did weave, I don't think it was ridiculously dangerous like some people have made it out to be, and Lando did have an opportunity to go to the right of Yuki and chose to go all 4 wheels over the white line. So yeah, that was a bit of a controversial incident in my opinion because whilst I understand why Yuki got a penalty, I think in that circumstance you either have to give both of them a 5-second penalty or none of them. It would have made, however, for a very interesting end to the race because had Lando been given that 5-second penalty, he would have had to serve it during his second pit stop, and that meant that probably he would have dropped behind Leclerc and would have had to overtake Leclerc on track to win the title and to get back on the podium. However, despite any hypothetical title drama at the end of the race, Lando and McLaren got it over the line, albeit by just 2 points, but hey, that's all that really matters when it comes to sport and Formula One. They are now the double champions for 2025, both drivers and constructors, and although you can see that there is clearly a huge amount of happiness, euphoria, excitement in the faces of both Lando and also the management and just the McLaren team as a whole, I have no doubt that behind the scenes, there is maybe an even more overwhelming feeling of relief. Because had this team lost the Drivers' Championship to Max Verstappen after wrapping up the Constructors' title 6 races ago in Singapore, it would have been an embarrassment, it would have been a capitulation on an almost titanic scale, and there would have been a lot of questions, there would have been a lot of pressure on the management in terms of how they handled this season. There is no doubt that Red Bull did a fantastic job to give Max Verstappen a title competitive car during the second half of 2025, but when you look at how competitive McLaren were over the course of the entire season, when you look at all of the mistakes that each of the drivers made multiple times across the year, especially on Piastri's side, which in the end has cost him the title, which I'm sure is going to hurt in the off-season, and then all of the mistakes that the team made in terms of team orders, papaya rules, the way they handled some racing situations, the way they communicated with Oscar and then also Lando during some of their races, and then also the technical stuff as well, like getting the strategy wrong, getting their cars disqualified at the end of the year. This has been a very, very rough title campaign by McLaren, and certainly when you compare it to how dominant their car is. Although this might sound harsh, once again I think it is a massive relief that Lando got it over the line, because this is one of the worst campaigns I have ever seen by a Formula One team with a car as dominant as the 2025 McLaren. Within all of that chaos, however, which I think stemmed from just a lack of experience when it comes to not even winning, but just challenging for titles within McLaren, you could see that the team as a whole was crumbling under the pressure, especially as Max was beginning to reel them in. Lando Norris, after having a very turbulent season where it didn't really start off on the best foot, he wasn't feeling comfortable with the car, he just wasn't kind of feeling the front end that he likes, especially with how McLaren kind of changed the car from 24 to 25. It took a very crucial suspension upgrade in Canada that totally transformed his feeling with the car and then totally transformed his competitiveness. He then found form at the absolute most crucial moment of the season with those back-to-back wins in Mexico and that dominant weekend both in the sprint and also in the Grand Prix in Brazil as well. It was those two races when Oscar was crumbling and when Max was just looking like he might win the championship that Lando really rose to the pressure, and I would argue that it was those two races under the most pressure that won him the championship. It was only then McLaren doing their absolute best to throw it away for both of their drivers with the disqualification in Vegas and then the terrible strategy in Qatar that kind of took it to a title decider. Lando Norris had one of the most turbulent seasons. It definitely wasn't a perfect campaign, but he is undoubtedly a worthy champion in my opinion, even if he hasn't been the outright best driver this season. Or what I think is going to be massively intriguing and a great storyline to watch over the coming years is what effect becoming champion is going to have on Lando going forward in terms of his confidence, his performance, his self-belief, and his ability to challenge for another championship. Now, 2026 is so open, absolutely no one knows what's going to happen, so we don't know whether McLaren is going to be dominant, whether it's going to be a race-winning car, or potentially at the back of the grid. Everything is on the table with such a massive rules reset, especially when so much of it depends on how good your power unit is going to be. But in terms of his place within McLaren compared to Oscar Piastri, I definitely think that this championship and wrapping it up ahead of Oscar was massive for Lando's confidence and his stature inside of the team. Had Oscar Piastri won the title ahead of Lando, I think it would have put Lando in a very compromising position. Because Oscar is still only a third-year driver, he won the sprint as a rookie, he won a Grand Prix in his second season, and was potentially on course to win the title in his third. And had he done so, he would have superseded Lando inside of McLaren, which I think would have brought Lando's future at McLaren into a little bit of doubt. Or with this title, I think Lando has secured his future and standing within the team. Because even though McLaren will say that they do not have a number one driver, the fact is that on a psychological level, Lando is the experienced driver and he is now the world champion. This puts Oscar into a bit of a tricky spot because, for example, if Max Verstappen decides that he wants to go to McLaren in 2027 after they look like they are the best placed team to challenge for titles in the new regulations in 26, McLaren will have to make a decision as to who to drop. Their championship winning driver Lando Norris or their potentially future championship winning driver in Oscar Piastri. Regardless of what is going to happen in the future, Lando and McLaren are champions. For McLaren, it completes an almost movie-like arc from the last 10 years, from being embarrassments back in 2015 at the start of the hybrid era with Honda, to being the back-to-back Constructors champions, now the double champions with Lando becoming the Drivers champion, and they go into the brand new era of 2026 as undoubtedly the title favourites. In terms of Lando, he has also improved massively. It's no secret that I was very critical of him last year and his title campaign. I thought he fell well short in terms of racecraft and mentality, but he has improved this season with much more stronger competition from Oscar Piastri, who has also improved and developed a lot over last year, and it was that mental strength that I think has won him the championship. To really clutch it up at the end of the season with those back-to-back wins as his teammate was struggling, that ultimately I think won him the championship. And just like Max did before with Lewis, he has been the one to break this incredible run that Max Verstappen has had, and he is the one that leaves 2025 as the brand new Formula 1 World Champion. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe, that would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.